Hi everyone! Throughout Sony's history, they have attempted to build their own Spider universe on 3 occasions. The first attempt was during Tobey Maguire's era, where they had plans for a solo Venom movie along with 4th, 5th and 6th Spider-Man films that would continue Peter Parker's story after Spider-Man 3. However, due to disagreements with Sam Raimi and the studio's desire to reboot the franchise, they couldn't execute their initial plans. This led to a second attempt to create a large Spider universe, the one that had the potential to compete on equal footing with Marvel. After that, they introduced the Amazing Spider-Man, but the audience wasn't very enthusiastic about it. The main reason for their disappointment was that the movie didn't feature the beloved Tobey Maguire and the familiar characters. Instead, they had a new actor, Andrew Garfield, and a whole new set of characters. Nonetheless, the film's box office success led to the green light for a sequel, and it is where the most intriguing part of the story begins. That's what we are going to discuss right now. First of all, it's worth noting that Sony is now making its third attempt to build a cinematic universe. So far, they haven't introduced their own Spider-Man version, which is why they might consider turning back to Garfield once again. In that case, let's start our video. In The Amazing Spider-Man 2, which the studio envisioned as the start of a larger franchise, they crammed in a vast number of setups for future spin-offs and sequels. They also introduced numerous different characters, such as Felicia Hardy, who is also known as the Black Cat, Gustav Fierce, Alistair Smythe, Alexei Sitsevich, aka the Rhino, Norman Osborn, and the list goes on. Furthermore, in deleted scenes, there were appearances of Mary Jane, her father, Venom, and even the resurrection of Richard Parker. They also teased the Sinister Six, which, by the way, could have included Dr. Octopus, Vulture, Green Goblin of Harry Osborn, Kraven the Hunter, Scorpion or Mysterio, alongside the Rhino. Actually, the lineup of villains was a big deal, because the studio was planning to make a whole movie about them, possibly without Spider-Man. Producers couldn't decide whether to release The Amazing Spider-Man 3 or Sinister Six first. At one point, they were thinking about splitting the story into 2 parts, with the events leading to TASM 3, but it's not clear how they would have done that. On one hand, it makes sense. Introducing 4 new major villains requires some level of introduction and development for the audience to connect with them. Otherwise, the idea doesn't hold much value. For sure, fitting all of this into a single film, where they aren't even the central characters, would be quite challenging. It suggests that a separate movie focusing on these villains would be needed. On the other hand, the way Sony wanted to execute their plans sometimes veered into the absurd. For instance, reviving Norman Osborn through cloning, after which he would lead the Sinister Six. In reality, there were many mind-blowing ideas, and they were all quite diverse. I even came across a draft of the movie. Let's take a look. A meteorite with a symbiote crashes to Earth, catching Oscorp's attention as they seek to obtain the extraterrestrial entity, but they are outplaced by Spider-Man. The Venom then attaches itself to Parker. Meanwhile, Gustav Fierce assembles the Sinister Six, led by Dr. Octopus, which later confronts the web-slinger in his black suit. However, Octavius was inclined to betray the villain team and engage Parker in combat himself. While this draft doesn't inspire much confidence, at least in part due to Garfield's 3-movie contract as Spider-Man, I still have a strong belief that something along these lines was brewing in the minds of Sony's executives. After all, the studio had plans to introduce Venom into the Amazing Spider-Man universe. For example, in one of the unproduced drafts of the third part, when Norman Osborn was dying in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, Oscorp froze his head. In the prequel, the corporation discovers a formula related to the symbiote that allows them to resurrect the dead. Norman is brought back to life, and along with the Sinister Six, begins hunting Parker to obtain his blood sample and then kill him. Meanwhile, Peter searches for the serum and, for some reason, resurrects Captain Stacy. By the way, the actor who played Gwen's father even hinted at his potential return. But during this time, the symbiote latches onto Parker, turning his suit black and vastly enhancing his powers. He then goes on to confront the Sinister Six in a fierce battle, which of course Spider-Man emerges victorious from. Realizing the anger and hatred the symbiote inflicts upon him, Spidey decides to rid himself of it once and for all. However, it latches onto Eddie Brock, giving birth to Venom. In fact, this draft has a direct sequel, because Sony planned to create a 4th part of The Amazing Spider-Man as well. In the story storyline. Peter would confront both the Sinister Six and Venom, with Black Cat assisting him. By the way, there was also a version where Parker completely defeated the supervillain team in the prequel, after which they never appeared again. Interestingly, the studio had plans to create a film about Spider-Man 2099. They intended to begin development of this movie right after the release of the fourth Spider-Man movie with Garfield. However, this project had no connection to Andrew's Spider-Man. Details about its plot are scarce, but it's known that Miguel O'Hara, also known as Spider-Man 2099, would have teleported to the present day in the finale of his solo film. Speaking of other Spider-Man characters, Sony also considered introducing Miles Morales into the mix. However, if they had gone down that path, the story of the third movie would have been quite different. After Gwen's death, Peter would have been consumed by grief and guilt. The entire film would have focused on Peter's emotional struggle due to his loss. At the same time, the Sinister Six, led by Gustav Fierce, would relentlessly hunt down the hero. In the final showdown, Spider-Man would have faced all the villains in a fierce battle, and Peter would have sacrificed himself to save all of New York City. In the fourth Spider-Man movie, Sony intended to introduce Miles Morales as the new Spider-Man. However, there isn't much information available about this. TASM 4 seems to be more a distant plan for Sony's bosses. Alongside it, they had other intriguing projects in the pipeline, including a film featuring both Black Cat and Silver Sable. The production of this film faced numerous delays, with the release date being pushed back many times, and the filming couldn't seem to get off the ground. Indeed, this film was quite risky, because both Black Cat and Silver Sable had never appeared on the big screen before, and the average moviegoer was unfamiliar with them. The studio was concerned that the movie might not be financially successful. They even considered cancelling the film entirely, in favor of two separate solo movies about Silver Sable and Black Cat. However, those plans didn't materialize. Years later, instead of those films, we will get movies about Kraven the Hunter and Madame Web. The Venom movie followed a similar path. The studio originally intended to create a Venom film even back in Tobey Maguire's time, specifically after Spider-Man 3. Development of the film even began at that time. Then, when Sony was already busy creating the Amazing Spider-Man cinematic universe, ideas for a Venom film naturally existed. It didn't materialize either. Still, it was only in 2018 that filmmakers finally managed to release a solo film about one of Spider-Man's main villains. Most of Sony's failed plans are closely related to the Amazing Spider-Man 3 or the Sinister Six. In fact, according to the producer's concept, these two projects complemented each other. They are essentially parts of one larger story, but creators never settled on a specific storyline. It's unclear whether the plot was about Parker's confrontation with the Sinister Six, or a story involving clones and symbiotes, or Parker's internal struggles and eventual demise in the end. Long story short, there were many ideas. In one of the drafts for the Amazing Spider-Man 4, where Spider-Man defeated the entire villain team in the prequel, the filmmakers considered adapting the neogenic Nightmare arc or introducing Carnage and Venom, leading to a showdown between them and Spider-Man. In general, it was another grand unfulfilled plan, of which Sony had quite a few. But you, my dear viewers, click on the like button, subscribe to the channel and write what you think about it in the comments below. We'll see you soon!